economy. That's why investors continue turning to one asset that has stood the test of time: physical gold and silver. For generations, gold has been viewed as a safe haven asset during periods of geopolitical tension and market volatility. That's why Advantage Gold wants to send you a free gold investment guide valued at $49, plus a free copy of economist Ken Rogoff's acclaimed book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, when you call 800-900-8000. Discover why central banks are buying gold, why many Americans are diversifying with precious metals, and how a tax and penalty-free rollover into physical gold and silver may fit into your retirement strategy. Don't wait until the next crisis dominates the headlines. Call Advantage Gold at 800-900-8000 right now. Consult your financial advisor before investing. Call 800-900-8000.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this hour of the Shaun Thompson Show is sponsored exclusively by DonleyAuctions.com. They need your guns. Sell for top dollar. DonleyAuctions.com.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Shaun Thompson. And this is the Shaun Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
One of my top 5 outlets is where my next guest is an editor. I think that the founding of Epoch Times by the person who survived Chinese communism sets the tone for how they love America. And when you look at Epoch Times and you look at the contributors, you understand that's exactly what they advocate for, just the love of Americanism. My next guest is the editor for the Epoch Times. Sam Dorman, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you reading us, too.
Well, I tell you what, I love it. I mean, I do, and I love the array of different topics you cover. You know, I'm not a men in tights chasing balls guy, but you even cover sports, which I find interesting. However, the Supreme Court, very interesting. A lot of cases, and you know, one thing I learned over the last few years is the way in which they release their judgments and how in Elena Kagan's case, it's so manipulated and so politicized. I wonder, is that why, because we had a couple of rulings that are pretty big news, and do they release them all in this time period to get you to talk about only the ones that deserve attention versus the ones that should deserve the attention?
You know, I don't know what their strategy is, but I think sometimes they arrange them according to topic. But yeah, usually the biggest cases are saved towards the end. And I think that's sort of because they want to avoid too much controversy before the summer break. But also they probably take a really long time on some of these cases because they're so high stakes.
You think they play cards, and you think they're wearing the robes and nothing else under it? I think they play Twister and eat a lot. And judging by Sotomayor, the buffet is delicious. But let's go over some of the cases that are released today and what you expect in the future.
Yeah, so there were a few released today. There's one about like property takings, another about religious liberty. There was one about a green card holder and whether or not he could be prohibited from entering the country if he was convicted of something. But the big cases that we're expecting, I think, are going to come on Thursday, maybe Monday and Tuesday. And those are the ones that are about, Trump's birthright citizenship policy, women's sports, things like the temporary protected status, and Trump's ability to fire people as well.
What's interesting is the green card. What's interesting is the fact that now something that I think a lot of people took for granted, at least I believe the Supreme Court justice or the Supreme Court decision is something that just falls in line with what people thought could happen at the border. And why don't you? What it basically means is the border enforcers themselves, the border agents, could actually turn somebody away. They don't have to just let them go through now, right? Is that the proper way to interpret this?
I think so. I think based on my reading of it, I didn't go too deep into it yet, but I think that's basically what they're saying. And, this was just kind of like another one of those cases that's come up under the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is a really big federal law that gives that gives the executive branch all this authority to enforce immigration in different ways. And so I think the question in this case was, how much evidence does a border officer or customs officer need to turn away someone who, was convicted of a crime. And even though they have a green card, there's a question of whether or not they're actually allowed in at that point.
So at this time, they can run pretty much, for lack of a better phrase, a background check to see who they are, and if they're lying or if they have a case, they could say, "Get the hell out of here! You're not getting in." Which is the way I would think it should have worked like this from the very beginning. But then you realize what happened during the dimwit and diaper years, some call Biden. Pretty much, you turn these guys into workers at Disney World, and they just let everybody through. And here's your app, fill out your name, and we're going to believe you. So this is really a correction that, like I said, I think 90% of Americans thought this was already going on, don't you?
Yeah, I think there's probably, there's a lot of, it's interesting because the Trump administration is really forcing courts to deal with this law in particular, the Immigration Nationality Act, but all these sort of like ways of enforcing immigration that I think a lot of people may have not known too much about, but it's, the Trump administration is sort of forcing the courts to consider whether or not they can be tougher with enforcement.
So, Sam, I know you're not a degenerate gambler the way I grew up, but if I were to bet, I would interpret this as good news moving forward with the ridiculous nature of Anchor Baby and the way in which China and other nations have used our birthright citizenship to really destroy our social safety net and our version of socialism and all the entitlements people are entitled to just being born here. I mean, it's estimated that there are over 1 million Chinese in China right now that are technically citizens and could collect Social Security by coming here or any other benefit. So if I were to take this little judgment and speculate and wager, I would bet that they are going to agree with Trump and no longer will we deal with this Anchor Baby. Would you bet the same way, or would you cover my action, Sam?
You know what? It's hard to say. I understand what you're saying, but I think so. Usually the decisions follow what the oral arguments were. If you look at the oral arguments for birthright citizenship, it was not looking very good for Trump. I think he's even recognized that, because he's posted on Truth Social, repeatedly sort of urging the public in the Supreme Court that we cannot have unrestricted birthright citizenship with the United States. But I think if you just go back and listen to the questions from the justices, it sounded like they were pretty skeptical of Trump's case. And even Justice Roberts said, we're not going to consider some of these more like the impacts of the policy, something like birth tourism and, that type of thing. So it's hard to say, but I think most people think that's a case that he will probably lose. On the other hand, though, I think that he will probably win some really big cases, like, for example, the FTC firing and then the temporary protected status lawsuit as well.
Well, let's think about it as if he doesn't win that. And, that's another one of those things. I'm pretty sure everybody thought, well, sure, you can fire people. After all, you're the commander in chief, and one of this agency falls underneath the executive branch. So the case to surmise it is, does he have the authority to fire the forever bureaucrat suck on who doesn't want to get fired? And this kind of shows you the benefits of the Leviathan and government employment, doesn't it? When their whole premise is nobody can fire us, and we're going to keep the job for as long as we want. How else could you interpret it?
Well, it's interesting because I think that we're just so used to having things like so-called independent agencies within the executive branch, right? But that's kind of come under question right now. Like, how can there be something that's independent, under Article 2 authority where the president is the head of that branch? But that's kind of how courts have ruled, I think, since 1935, which is when the Supreme Court ruled in this case called Humphrey's Executor. It basically said that Congress could set certain limits on the president's ability to fire these people. And so Trump has really been challenging that. And I think, the Supreme Court in recent cases has been sort of indicating that they want to overturn that precedent. And so I think that's probably, it seems like that's what they're going to do.
Well, one of the things that you have to recognize in these Democrat mafia areas, like my old one in Chicago, they feather bed the government employees, right? So they multi-layer them. We have thousands of guys that are already retired, never showed up to work. So this has been one of the major ways in which that they build the foot soldiers and the infrastructure of loyalty. What I liked about Trump is I like that apprentice thing. You're fired. And I thought he was going to run on, if you were hired by the government in the last 10 years, you're fired, and we're going to start all over. So the reality is somebody could run like that. But if he loses this, they can't. And what that means is it would be a big strengthening rod in the back, a la Biden, to employees if they don't have to ever worry about being fired by new presidents.
Well, so this case in particular is about like the higher level bureaucrats, right? And I think that Trump will probably win this one. So I think he and future presidents will be able to, fire these bureaucrats like the FTC chair like much easier. But there were some other cases before this about like sort of lower level staff within the federal government. And I think the Supreme Court there hasn't been a huge ruling on that, but I think that courts, at least the Supreme Court, has generally agreed with Trump that, there's some more flexibility with these layoffs, these mass layoffs.
Now tell me about one I don't think I'm going to like, the property one. Tell me about the property one, Sam.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that much about that one. It was pretty interesting, just like looking at some bits of the opinion, though. Just this idea that like the government can sell your house, right, and take the money from that, and that they can determine how much you get from that as well. So, I haven't really followed this case that much, but it seems pretty interesting, and like a potential win for property owners.
Well, what's interesting is in Cook County, which is a real crime syndicate area in Illinois, right? Cook County, it was brought to their version of the Supreme Court, and they said that the way in which they were tax auctioning property off, that it was deemed unconstitutional. But here's the issue, Sam. For 50 years, every half-ass connected Democrat, wise guy, and lawyer were in on that scam, and they were stealing property on pennies on the dollar. So when you have a case like this, right, and all of a sudden it's deemed unconstitutional, what happens to the people who were victims of this decades ago? They're held harmless, right? There's no recourse, even though it's unconstitutional. If this happens before your case, the way I read it, is you can whistle Dixie. It's all about the stuff moving forward because they still have the protection from the government. The government always has protection against any injustice, for lack of a better argument, right?
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't looked too much into this one, but I think, I'll trust what you're saying about that.
Well, it's interesting, too, because there's also a case about what a policeman can do when they pull you over. I heard there was a verdict on that. Did you write about that one as well?
When they pull you over, I think that might have been one of the orders. I don't know if there was like a formal opinion.
Well, there was this move of these sovereign citizens where they don't want to give anybody any information. They don't want to give them the license. They don't want to have a license and the rest of it. And I thought that it came out today, but maybe that's one of the ones that are coming out on Friday, because that's really undermining the principles of what law is. If a policeman can't ask you questions, and I understand everybody has a right, but you have to see the way it's bastardized. We have a drunk Cook County commissioner in Chicago. She bounces off of two cars. She's got an open wine bottle in the car. She uses her political clout to get out of it after she's on video, clearly hammered out of her mind. And the argument by the sovereign citizens is never get out of the car. You don't have to answer any questions, even involved in an accident. So if we don't have a base understanding of what law, what an obligation of a citizen is, and what he has to answer by a policeman, you really have the earmarks of an uncivil society, don't you?
I mean, that sounds pretty difficult, right? You have to have some kind of investigation there. So,
Well, it's in Chicago, so she was investigated, but as a Cook County commissioner, she was less repulsive than the normal Cook County commissioners, so she probably lost her underpants in one of the investigators' offices. So she was let go. You don't have to put that in the Epoch Times, although if you will, I think it'll up your numbers.
Gotcha. Thank you for the advice.
Thank you. Anytime. So you also broke the story today. It was your paper, that your outlet, that talked about the 455 people charged with stealing $6.5 billion in healthcare fraud. Now, granted, that may be less than Minnesota's thievery, but this has been going on for at least a decade. So this is an interesting reality. And with all of your experience, you're talking about $65,000 million stolen by 455 people. And we now have the case of what these entitlements, what these so-called Medicare and Medicaid. This story is just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion, but I'm wondering how you see it. Are you seeing more and more stories about the absolute reality that this country could have had $1 trillion stolen in just healthcare fraud since 2008?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, right? Because there have been so many cases, like just with the Trump administration's sort of initial efforts on this, we've seen like week after week, day after day, there's these cases coming out of the Justice Department, but then also HHS and J.D. Vance talking about all these different instances of fraud. And it's going like, into the billions. So you have to wonder how much have they not tapped into yet? How much have they not reached, and how long has this been going on for?
One of the things that I know you guys were keeping your eye on is the infiltration of our country through Chinese communists, through the agents, through the business partnerships with the Biden administration, through the business partnerships with the Obama administration, through the business partnerships with the Daley administration in Chicago that goes back to the 80s. When you look at the way in which the Chinese agents operate and partner with so many of the relatives of high-powered politicians, I mean, that's pretty much the hook that started in Chicago. It's called the Chicago Way, where you partner with a simpleton, you put him on an LLC, you pretend he's an investor with no money down. And this is what the Chinese perfected, not only in our country, but around the world. I feel like this FBI is at least taking it on, and you're writing about it. Do you think this is something that through knowledge could hopefully end one day, or is it something that the next time, say, Rahm Emanuel runs and win, we'll pretend he's an investment banker too?
So are you saying that? Well, do I think that the Chinese influence will end, or
do you think that this much information that's out there? I mean, it's you're writing about it. Everybody's writing about it. For once, the FBI is truly investigating it versus sitting on the evidence of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden partnering with Chinese entertainment companies, and a lot of it. This information now and the way in which it's out, it's undeniable. This is something that could definitely change the way Americans perceive the Chinese so-called investor. That in Chicago, you're taught is going to save the downtown area. Ooh, the Chinese. When the reality is they're just partnering with political powerhouses to wash money, aren't they?
You know, I think that Hunter Biden and that whole situation has really brought a lot of attention to this issue, and I think that the Trump administration has clearly shown an interest in sort of countering foreign influence as well as dealing with some of these influences, particularly on the Democratic side. And so, you know, he's had, I mean, some of these prosecutions, not even related to China, but some of these prosecutions like Comey and these other officials from the Biden administration haven't played out super well. But, I mean, he's pretty dogged, so who knows? It could lead to something.
All right, so I want to tell you how good you look because my first car had roll-up windows because I lost all my money gambling. So the good news is you covered me in that bet for birthright citizenship. So if you can still have an anchor baby, you win a steak dinner, and if not, I win. Deal, Sam Dorman?
That sounds good.
All right, wonderful. You can find him at theepochtimes.com. Thanks for making time for me, and tell everybody at the Epoch Times how important you are. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
Make money, smoke cigars, and live free on the Shaun Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm Ken Mariotti, owner of Woodland Windows and Doors, a third-generation family-owned business since 1969. We know you're bombarded by choices when shopping for new windows or doors, so we're inviting you to experience the Woodland difference. For decades, we have been transforming living spaces with Marvin Windows, a fifth-generation family business. Marvin replacement windows have been known to increase the warmth of your cold rooms by 10 degrees. Think about that, 10 degrees warmer. When you welcome Woodland into your home, you will get a product expert to transform your living spaces, full-time, dedicated professional installers that you can trust in your home, along with the best products like Marvin. These are the reasons